Welcome to the extra practice lesson for place value in the decimal places. So we're going to be specifically reviewing place value to the hundredths, and the materials you'll need for today are simply pencil and paper. We're going to jump right in. We don't have a thinking question because that's going to be answered at the beginning of lesson 3, if you remember me explaining that at the end of lesson 2. So we're going to start off by reviewing the names of the place values. We are pretty familiar with our whole numbers, so we're only going to review the hundreds. So we have the hundreds, the tens, the ones, and we would write those 100, 10, 1, and then we get into our decimal places. Pause your video and try and remember the name of the first decimal place when we go past the decimal point. Write it down on your paper, pause your video, and do that now. The name of it is tenths. The tenths, remember that. It's really important to put that TH in there. In fact, I'll underline it so we don't forget it. Tenths. Now pause your video and try and write out what that decimal looks like. Go ahead and pause your video and do that now. It's going to look like 0.1. That is 1/10. Now pause your video and write the name for the next decimal place and what the number looks like. Pause your video and do that now. It's going to be the hundredths place, and that is 0.01. That says 1/100th. Now remember, with decimals, it's always meaning less than 1. And it's always going to be 10 times less. As you go into other place values, it's always going to be 10 times less than the place value before it. We're going to jump right in and start doing some practice problems. We're going to start using some problems that use the big blue square as the 1, and then we're going to get into other examples using other things as 1 to get you thinking in different ways about decimals. So if you remember from the last video, when we're looking at this as our 1, only when we're looking at this as our 1, the value of this long right here is, pause your video, draw this long, and then write the value. So when I put this long over my 1, it tells me I can have 10 of those in this. If I broke this up into 10 pieces, this would be just one piece of it. And so the long equals 1/10. And then this little square right here is going to equal what? Pause your video, draw the little square on your paper and what its value is, and pause your video and do that now. This little square is 1/100th. So 0.01, 1/100th. That's important for you to remember, and we're reviewing it so it'll make it a little bit easier once we do these practice problems. So this first one, we are going to write out what decimal of our 1 is covered with blocks. So you have to look at what the tenths are and what the hundredths are, and then put those together to write the decimal. You're going to pause your video and write the decimal for that right now. Hopefully you got 0.54. Whisper how you would read that decimal the correct way. Hopefully you whispered 0 and 54 hundredths. Remember, you read it just like it's a normal number, and then you say the place value of the last number that you read. So our hundredths place is the last one we read, so that's 54 hundredths. And the reason I got that is because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tenths. So that's where this 5 comes from, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 hundredths. Let's try another one. On this, be careful because look, we have a big blue square, and then we also have these that are covered. Pause your video and write the decimal right now. Because we have this big blue square here, that means we have one whole and then 3 hundredths. it's really important that you put this 0 here, because that tells me that we don't have any tenths. We don't have any of those longs that are covering our whole. And that means that we have to put a 0, because otherwise we would write it like this, and that says a completely different number. That would be saying that all of this is covered, and that's not true. And we would read this 1 and 3/100ths. 1 and 3/100ths. We're going to try using something else as our 1 now. So up here, I'm showing you what the 1 is. And then down here is where we're going to calculate the decimal value. I'm going to walk you through this one because it is going to be a little bit trickier because we have to change the way that we're thinking. So if our 1 is a $1 bill and we're looking at pennies, how much is a penny worth? 1 cent. How many pennies are in a dollar? 100. So that means that 1 penny equals 1/100th of a dollar. We've been working with hundredths. That's interesting. When we write pennies, the value of a penny, when we're writing money, we always write it as $0, 0, and then 1, because that tells us 1 cent, or 1/100th of a dollar. What about dimes? How many dimes do we have in a dollar? We have 10. And that means that 1 dime equals 1/10th of a dollar. 1 out of 10 dimes is 1/10th of a dollar, because we need 10 of them to get to our whole. So that means that when we write the value of a dime, we write it as $0 and then 10 cents. So we put the 1 in the tenths place because it's 1/10th of 100, or $1. So there's 100 cents in a dollar, and that makes it really easy to break it up when we're looking at dimes and pennies especially. We can also do it with nickels and quarters, and we'll look into that a little bit later. But so now I'm going to erase this. Hopefully you'll be able to remember what the value of each of them is. And we're going to write the decimal for this amount of change right here. So we have, remember what I said, each dime equals 1/10. So I know I don't have any dollar bills, so it's going to be $0, and then 1/10. And how many hundredths do I have? 1, 2, 3. 3/100ths. So I have 13/100ths of a dollar right here. Or we could even read it 13 cents. I'm going to put my dollar sign so that I have proper notation. Here's another problem, and I'd like you to try this one on your own. Look over here, we have a nickel. A nickel is not going to be worth the same amount that a dime or a penny is worth, so keep that in mind. Ask yourself, how many hundredths or how many tenths of a dollar is a nickel? And what is that going to look like when I write it out? So challenge yourself, pause the video, and try to write this as a decimal. Remember, this isn't included in the decimal. This is just to remind you that this is your 1. Pause the video and do that now. Your decimal for this one is going to be 0 because we don't have any wholes, we don't have any dollars, and 29 cents. Or read it to yourself as a decimal. 0 and 29/100ths. I got that because each of these dimes is worth 1/10. So I have 2 tenths here. I put my tenths in the tenths place, so I have a 2. And then I knew that this is worth 5 cents. So thinking about pennies, I know that 1 cent is 1/100th. So 2 cents would be 2/100ths, 3 cents would be 3/100ths, 4 cents would be 4/100ths, and 5 cents would be 5/100ths. So this equals 5/100ths. Now if I added my pennies, 5/100ths, 6/100ths, 7/100ths, 8/100ths, 9/100ths. So I have a 9 in my hundredths place. So this could also be read 29 cents. Okay, this one's even harder now. We have a quarter, 2 dimes, and 2 pennies. Pause your video and try as hard as you can to write this as a decimal. The answer is right here. Read that to yourself as a decimal, not as money notation, but as a decimal. It is 47 hundredths. So, how did we get that? Well, I started out by looking at my dimes, because I already know that those are tenths. So I have 2 tenths here. So I'll just write that over here, just so I don't forget. Now I have my quarter. That's 25 cents, which I know that means 25 hundredths. That's tricky. How do I make that a decimal? Well, I'll break it apart. I'll think of it as 2 dimes and a nickel. Okay, that's not so bad now. So I have now 4 dimes. So that's going to give me 4 tenths. And then I have 5 100ths, 6 100ths, 7 100ths. And that gets me 47 100ths, or 47 cents. Now here, I have a different one. Look up top. I have a $10 bill. It is not a $1 bill anymore. So that means my tenths and hundredths are going to have a different monetary value. How many $1 bills are there in $10? There's 10. So that means a $1 bill equals 1/10 of $10. So that means it's going to go in the tenths place. How many dimes are going to go into $10? This one's going to be a little bit trickier to think about. Pause your video and try and figure out how many dimes there are in $10. I think you can do it. If you came up with 100, great job. That's true, there are 100 dimes in $10. And the way you can figure that out is that you know that there's 10 dimes in $1. And so then if you count by tens up to $10, so 10 cents in $1, 20 cents in $2, 30 cents in $3, all the way up to $10, you get to 100 dimes. So that means that 1 dime equals 1 100th. That should help you out with writing your decimal. Pause the video and try and do that now. The answer is 0.53. Whisper how to read that number right now. It's 53 hundredths. So this right here represents 53 hundredths of $10. Great job. That was really challenging. Okay, now we have another different one. This is our 1. Before, this represented our tenths. But now, it represents the whole. So, how many of these are there in our whole? We have 10 of them. So one of these equals 1/10. Pause your video and write the decimal. The answer is 0.8. Read that decimal to yourself. 0 and 8 tenths. We have 0 and 8 tenths here. Okay, this is our whole. This is a thousands cube. There are 1,000 cubes in this. So that means that you need to figure out how many 100 flats there are and how many 10 rods there are to find the decimal. I'm not going to help you on this one. I'd like you to try it on your own. Pause the video and try and write this decimal now. The answer is 0.44. Read that number to yourself now. It says 0 and 44 hundredths. Now the way I got that is I thought to myself, how many flats are there in this thousands cube? I know that there's 10 100ths in 1,000 because I'm thinking back to the place value lesson from lesson 1. And I know there's 10 100ths in a thousands block. So that means 100 equals 1/10 of 1,000 because there's 1 out of 10. And then I know that there are 10 rods in 100. So that means that there must be 100 10 rods in 1,000 cubed. So that's going to equal 1/100th. I have 4 tenths, that's where I got my 4 from, and I have 4 100ths, that's where I got this 4 from. So as you can see, we can have different things representing our 1, and that's going to change how we look at the decimal and how we look at what represents the tenths and what represents the hundredths. But as long as you think, what is 1/10 of this and what is 1/100th of this, you'll be able to find the decimal quite easily. For this one, we're going to be looking at a centimeter ruler as our 1. The 1 is 10 centimeters. So if one paper clip is 1 centimeter long, what decimal of the ruler would be covered? What part of the ruler would be covered if we measured all 6 paper clips along the ruler? Pause your video and solve that now. It's going to be 0.6. Read that as a decimal. 0 and 6/10. And that's because there are 10 centimeters in our hole, and each of these paper clips is 1 centimeter long. So 1 centimeter is 1/10 of the hole, and I have 6 of them, so that's 6/10. This is the same thinking question that we had in lesson 2. I'm just reminding you of what it is so that when you go on to watch lesson 3, you'll have thought about it recently. So why do you think we need decimals? What makes them important? I hope you enjoyed this extra practice lesson and that it helped you and that you feel ready to go on to lesson 3. Goodbye.